Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another very exciting Civilizations in Review. I'm here with one of our current fellows, Alphaeus Hansen, to chat all about the Nabhani Dynasty. And with me, as usual recently, which is such a treat for everyone involved, is Anna, previous content writer extraordinaire and now co-moderator extraordinaire, to chat and learn more about the Nabhanis. Thank you all so much for joining us here on Facebook. This is where it's being live streamed. We will also cross-post this once this call is done to our website, our Spotify, our YouTube, and our Instagram, so you can engage with this great conversation and all the content from it in 5 different spots. But the best place to go to is the actual article itself. There are a lot of hyperlinks. Alphaeus was a very meticulous researcher, which we very much appreciate. So if you go to the Alfusaic website, that's alfusaic.net, and scroll to the Civilizations 101 and then down to Nabhani, you will follow along with us and see a lot more of the research, background, history, etc. Of this pretty influential empire. So with that said, thank you all for being here. I will throw it to Anna to read the 101 word introduction.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome, Al. The Nabhani Dynasty was a ruling dynasty in modern-day Sultanate of Oman, which lasted from 1154 to 1624. Despite continuous internal and external conflicts, the Bani Nabhan family was able to retain power for almost 500 years, secure the frankincense trade, and build a lasting fortress in the city of Bahla. During their reign, the Nabhanid consolidated power from the Imams. However, towards the end of their dynasty, the influence of the Imams began to become more entrenched. The end of the Nabhani dynasty came as the Yarubid Imam, Nasir bin Murshid, removed Nabhani ruler Suleiman bin Mudaffar in 1624. So as we usually hear, there's a ruler that sort of takes down another, this is kind of like a trend. But what interested me a lot from this empire, first of all, I loved the photo in the Nabhani page, that they proclaimed their independence from the Seljuks. And I was, so I wrote about Seljuk, and you can find that on alphazaic.net. But Al, really, this was something that it impressed me, and I started kind of like trying to research. So tell me how that went about, their inception, and how they started to grow, especially since Seljuks were really strong at some point.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed doing the research on Nabhani. One of the reasons I chose them was just because I have a tutor in Arabic who's from the same region. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about the history. And speaking of the history, there was a lot of internal conflicts within the region. And I think you got a little bit of that transition just because of an eroding of power from the previous dynasty, and then a kind of a seizing of power by the Nabhanis, the Nabhani family. And then they kind of moved into their reign and dynasty. And then, that's kind of, some of the things that they did during their dynasty was characteristic of them, but there's dynasties that have specific, individualized things that they like to do during their dynasty, or things that they like to implement. And that was the same with the Nabhanis.
It's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing all of these pieces thus far. What I really like about the Nabhanis is the trade emphasis. I know it's pretty typical. You can kind of categorize these civilizations by like trade, conquest. Really, those are the 2 big buckets. But especially geographically, really the only place an empire in Oman can go is by water with trade, right? And so the fact that that was such a big part of this empire, probably why it lasted for such a long time. Do you mind talking a little bit more about?
Yeah, definitely.
Their trade there. That's really, that's how Oman as a modern country has existed so flourishingly. So it makes sense that Nabhani sort of began that practice.
Right. And one of their main areas of trade was with frankincense, right? So that is a spice that is uniquely occurs, or uniquely is produced in that region of Oman. And that was capitalized by the Nabhani dynasty. And it was part of the trade within the region, all the way up to Bahrain, the countries within the region, and then down into Africa. They kind of connected that with the frankincense. And what's interesting is that even though the maritime trade is so popular, it's kind of what trade is thought of. It's what when we think about trade, a lot of it occurs via the water, but the Napani were able to trade frankincense mostly over land, and that kind of substantiates how they were able to secure the frankincense trade and then use that to capitalize and build their economy throughout the region.
That's actually very fascinating to think about because, with the, innovations that we have in the day, we can't even imagine how, trading something through land, especially in these big, large areas, is just really something wonderful. And I think that that's, as Ben said, like, as you said as well, that they lasted for so many years. They were able to secure this and have autonomy over it. When I think about like frankincense, and we were just talking about it before the live, was that, it's still influential today. And so I always like to kind of go into that topic, like what else from this empire can we see today? What else from this dynasty is part of their modern influence, that it remains, although that happened many, many years ago.
Right, yes. And that is something that I think about often, is even when I'm looking at, other civilizations throughout history, is how do they leave their mark? The Nabhanis, they constructed the Bahla fort during their reign, and that was actually also where they located their capital, in the city of Bahla. And it was, the Bahla fort was, when we think about forts, it's to keep invaders out, and that was one of the things that I would say was characteristic during the time, was just invaders, conflict within the region, from outside the region, the Persians, the Portuguese, and the fort was actually destroyed slightly, I would say partially destroyed, and then restored later on in 2012. It became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986, I believe. So it's still there today. It's restored. Obviously a tourist spot. If you ever are in that region, you should definitely check it out. I have not been, although it is on my bucket list to make a visitation. Yes.
Is this the photo?
It is.
Let me see. Yes.
It is the photo.
Of the Nabhani is the like remnant
Yeah.
of the fort. Yeah,
Wow.
I've been. It is fabulous. Highly recommend. It's a really, really cool piece of Omani regional history. That some of these ancient relics have been destroyed, pillaged, whatever throughout time, and this is not necessarily as old as some of these other empires we've talked about, and yet still it stands, which is incredibly fascinating. Yeah, it's a really cool city. I definitely recommend. I think it's not too much to keep talking about frankincense for a bit longer, so I'm going to. I find that such a very fascinating piece. It's sap, more or less syrup, as you may think of it, but it's usually used as like a perfume. Everywhere in most Catholic churches, if you've walked into one, that musty aromatic smell is most likely frankincense. And I think the importance of that, those trees only really grow in Oman and Yemen, the southern part of Arabia. So if you know much about Omani, or excuse me, Christian history, the gifts that Jesus received were frankincense, myrrh, and gold. Frankincense only grows in Oman and Yemen. Granted, the Nabhanis were well after Jesus was born, but
Right.
the legacy of that sap, that tree, that trade, that engagement very much still continues to Nabhani, and even to today. Modern Oman, if you ever get the chance to,
Right.
all of the marketplaces are filled with frankincense, frankincense candles, frankincense clothing, frankincense gems to play with, smell, burn, etc. It's everywhere. So I don't know if you have any more frankincense facts.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely. Well, number one, like you said, it's unique to the region, and that just kind of speaks to how you have something that goes back even to before the Nabhanis, right? When Jesus was born, till now. If you go to the region, like you mentioned, frankincense and other spices are very popular. I even have frankincense incense. There's colognes, there's perfumes that are based off of that. That you can burn within your house, or you can use that as kind of like as I mentioned, just a perfume or cologne. and that's popular in the region. Now, one of the things that was kind of specific to the region at the time was that in order to get the sap from those trees, it was relatively difficult at the time just because of where the trees grew, and how they. I see you have it right there, Ben. That's cool. But yes, it was relatively difficult to get those, to abstract that. But I think that just speaks to the fortitude and the perseverance of the people in the region, and also that kind of permeates throughout the dynasty itself.
We can stop the frankincense chat here. It's such an important part of Omani history, and the Nabhanis being an Omani empire, and all of the aspects of regional land-based, water-based trade. I mean, I have physical frankincense right here. I got from Oman. I don't know if this is Nabhani specific, but still, it's from the same region. So we can shift to the rest of this empire. It's just something that I think is really important to chat about, because it's really what makes and has made Oman such a big player in regional affairs, more than just frankincense, but that is a huge part of it, and something I just thought would be important to chat about. Okay, Anna, here's a real question about the Nabhanis. Go for it.
Actually, no.
Frankincense.
Weird enough, like because I went into the articles of where the trade was mentioned that Al posted here, which are amazing, by the way. And it talks about also their riches coming from this frankincense trade, because it was so rich, everyone loved it. And as you very well mentioned, they traveled by land, and they were able to take it to many different places. And so it had an influence even in their economics. So I think that talking about frankincense, it's both important for the empire, but also all the other aspects that are in the civilizations. What influence does it have today, and how it affected, how it impacted their economics, or how it made it better, and how it highlights certain things about this wonderful dynasty, the Nabhanis. So I was just kind of going based on that and thinking about what more made them have this great economic system and long lasting, like this longevity really in their dynasty.
Right. And apart from the frankincense trade, I think one thing you're going to realize with the Napani, and just in the region in general, is that they have to branch out, right? You have to connect with, at the time it wasn't necessarily countries, but I guess you could call them countries, regions, other than where you are based. And that's exactly what the Nabhani did. They had some of their kings go into Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, some parts of Kenya, down into Morocco, to set up and to establish and substantiate those connections. And I'm sure that yielded economic benefit. It doesn't necessarily, when I was doing my research, there wasn't a wealth of information on the economic benefit that they derived from making those connections. But given the fact that I majored in economics, I kind of understand the fact that it's just something that was probably top of mind for them. Even if they have the frankincense trade, they probably want to substantiate that and reinforce that by going into other regions and establishing relations with other dynasties.
Actually, that was a key part of the Seljuks, that most of the diplomatic ties that they had with the region, and why they became such a vast, they really covered a lot of the Middle Eastern region, was the ability to trade and also form these type of relationships. So it was just as important to have this ties with other countries or other areas in the region, as well as it was, transporting something that was important, that that was unique, like frankincense, or spices, or any other things that they were kind of rich on. So I think that that's a very interesting relation that they had with the Seljuks, and they came after. So it was a connection I made, and it was very fantastic. I'm absolutely loving this.
Right, and you're mentioning, it just made me think, how we have dynasties, we have civilizations that are kind of predicated, they substantiate themselves, and they kind of stay afloat through either economic trade or maybe conquest. And that's kind of how the Nabhanis were disillusioned towards the end of their towards the end of their reign, it's just by internal conflict, and then also conflict from outside. I mentioned the Portuguese. They they in 1507 they captured one of the coastal cities, and then kind of substantiated and started expanding outside of there. The Persians also moved into the region and were fighting with the Nabhanis. And I think, when you think about just trying to withstand external forces such as the Portuguese, and sophisticated forces at that,
Yeah.
Portuguese and Persians, that can make it very difficult for a civilization or a dynasty such as the Nabhani to continue. And I'm sure they saw some of that, but what's, I guess, ironically enough, the way that the following dynasty took power was just through internal conflict.
What's
Interesting.
fascinating about the history of Oman too is this is like the second to last empire of modern Oman. So Nabhani, Yarubid, and then Oman as a country, more or less is the chain. So as you sort of mentioned, that internal schism led to then Oman as a country unifying in some ways. So it's kind of cool to see, granted this was maybe 600 years prior to the formation of the country of Oman, and yet these components, the trade, the internal components, the religious connections, etc., are all very much still present. I would venture to say even before the Nabhanis, the empire prior to the Nabhanis also had some similar spaces. That is right. My PhD is about Oman, so I can talk for days on end about this. But what is really fascinating to me, specifically with the Nabhani, is how during this period of time they overcame the Seljuks, probably the biggest superpower at the time. Sorry, Anna, that was your empire, and still maintained this not isolationism, but this independence through all of their trade routes and networks. Something that, again, modern Oman continues to in a lot of spaces, and just something that's very interesting, sort of those parallels of power and engagements. Most other empires had land in more than one modern country. The Nabhanis are basically more or less the same borders as actual modern day Oman. And I think there's something interesting about the comparison to all these other empires, wide flux conquest, water, land, regional exploration, whereas the Nabhanis are like, no, this is good. This is our area. We got it. Let's solidify and really focus on trade and connection. Because there really wasn't a lot, correct me if I'm wrong, Alphaeus, but there really wasn't a lot of conquest, a lot of expansion. That seemingly wasn't the emphasis. And even the conflict was of the end of the empire wasn't a war. It was just like an internal struggle and the Portuguese taking a bigger city. Am I correct in all of those pieces?
Yeah, you're exactly correct. And I think a lot of what you see with the Nabhani is more of an internal focus, and I guess maybe it's too early to say quality of life at the time, but I think you could say they were more focused on the citizens, the people living within the empire, more so than trying to branch outward. And that's something that I think you even still see maybe a little bit more today too. Is that the regional countries are very focused on the citizens, the well-being of their citizens. And I think the Nabhani, they leveraged the religious figures at the time to balance and kind of mediate or modulate power at the time. And they did that probably to their success for the time being. But of course, that kind of changed towards the end, and that was a feature of the transition of power.
Also on that religious front, real quick, just to jump in, they aren't Sunni or Shia, right? They're Ibadi from the research you did, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not a Muslim scholar by any means, but just like a real quick overview. The Sunnis and the Shias, as most know, the schism is over who would be the Caliph, the leader of the Muslim world. We're not going to get into all of the internal politics they're fighting, but that is more or less that division. The Ibadi community, that was not an emphasis of theirs, and instead more or less migrated to Oman to focus on equality of life. I will say it. I think that's a very astute observation of what this empire does and sort of Omani history with the Ibadi religious school guiding them. I mean, quite frankly, look at modern Oman today, a country that's friends with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I would venture to say the only country that can accurately say they have a strong relationship with both of these two spaces, right? So that sort of Ibadi legacy is very present here in the Nabhanis. And if you would like to talk a bit more about the religious makeup, I think that would be really interesting as well.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a ton of information on the religious makeup, but what I would say is that, when they first, in the incipiency of the dynasty, what you saw was the Napani kind of rolled back the powers of the imams, so that they were really mostly, I guess you could say, they just held the title of imam more so than the temporal or spiritual power that they used to hold in the past and in other times. And I don't necessarily know why they did that or what benefit that brought to them, but I'm sure that you see that throughout history with other civilizations, is that they do use to some degree, the religious officials, the religious offices, to at times consolidate power or to kind of distribute power to more regional areas of their civilization, country, or dynasty in this case.
I think that was something that many civilizations didn't actually think of, the distribution of power, but also this sort of, I was thinking on this religious conversation that we're having, it's very interesting how the imams were not the ones that, proclaimed themselves as the rulers of the dynasty, and it was very different from many of the, civilizations in this time, because usually the religious leader would be the person who would be their malik, their king. And that was something that surprised me, but at the same time, it had me thinking about, what was what created that difference in the ruling system. And why was it because I find it very important, but was that like what gave them more success, or is that what made their eventual decline? They eventually fell off, because according to what I know about the Islamic religion is that you have to abide by certain laws of Islam, and so this is why most of the imams or the rulers were part of there were also religious rulers as well. So I mean, it's just a thought,
Right.
do we think that this is why sort of the dynasty fell, or is it more about other powers and that sort of thing?
I think it was more so other powers. I wouldn't say they ventured too far away from the religion. I would say that they kind of just consolidated power more so than it was in the past. From my understanding, they were still pretty adherent to the religion. Excuse me. And I think what you saw later on was that other groups used the fact that they kind of shifted and adjusted the power of the imams to their benefit in consolidating power.
Very interesting.
There's some of the hyperlinks on your article, Alpheus, dives into that deeper. So we don't have to go to a full theological and political comment now, but the word imam has a lot of different definitions in Islam, not just religious leader, sometimes political, sometimes both, sometimes transcending as well. It's a very fascinating, even in Arabic, that word, which we won't get into, but that has a lot of meaning embedded. So any final sort of cool pieces, fun facts, things you learned about this empire in your research that you'd like to share with us, Alpheus?
Well, I would say just one thing that kind of amazed me was the fact that trade can be established in one region and kind of perpetuated throughout the region, right? They if you look at that region, that is vast space, right? To be able to connect trade from Northern Africa all the way up through the Levant and out into Asia. I think that is something that always kind of blew my mind, was the scale of the trade, and the fact that they were able to sustain that for as long as they did. So I wouldn't say necessarily one specific fact, but just the overall maintenance of their dynasty and the trade that substantiated it.
You could kind of see those connections still engaged in modern geopolitical embassies, communiques, conversations, like trade ledgers, etc. I mean, I'm not going to say the Nabhanis are the number one originator, but they very much perpetuated that idea of I guess, global maintenance of ties, connections, engagements, trade. Yeah, that's
Yeah, they were one link in a very long chain of trade.
yeah. I mean, what is really cool on the trade conversation, empires that 3000, 4000 BCE were trading as well.
Right.
I think that's one of the most constant ways humans have engaged with one another is trade. And the Nabhanis are just a more recent but fabulous example of an empire successfully managing that. Yeah, great point.
Yeah,
Anna, any final things you'd like to bring up from the Seljuk side or anything else?
literally, it was just that, just the thinking of trade and diplomacy as kind of like, a reality of today, but also a reality of the past is just really fascinating. And to really see how some of these dynasties handled it, managed it, and really it influenced not only the rest of the world and, by bringing us amazing frankincense, but also, but also on how it actually really does reflect what Oman's, government and a lot of what they do today, what it looks like. As you said before, Oman kind of has this sort of same standpoint and this relationship with the rest of the region. So it really, they really identified. I think the Nabhanis are a great example of what Oman is today. And great job, Al. Wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. Well, here's a final little look. My light is not very great, but here's some frankincense so you can see little nuggets of sap and deliciousness in its smell, in my opinion, at least. But regardless, thank you, Alpheus, for this really, really well researched and talked about article. The Nabhanis are, probably one of our most recent empires in terms of to modern times. And there are so many components of modern Omani government, politics, structure, religion, etc., that are very parallel to what the Nabhanis focused on. So thank you. I hope you get the chance to go to Oman very soon. It's a really wonderful place. Happy to do another call much later about it. It's a very interesting dynamics, especially with the e-body, the training, the frankincense. So much of what the Nabhanis focused on. But I'll digress there and say thank you for writing this article, Anna. Thank you for your co-moderating prowess. And thank you, listener, for engaging with this really interesting article. There are 93 empires in total, so you've just heard one. Please check out the other 92 as we hop around 5,000 years BCE till only a couple hundred years ago, the span of that time and the empires, dynasties, kingdoms, caliphates, etc., that make up what we now call the modern Southwest Asia, North Africa, or you may know it as MENA region. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.